One broom, 4 men, and a message that would break Chisholm Ease's life apart. The day started like any other dusty morning in Umuahia. Before the sun came up, Chisholm was already awake, lighting the firewood under her 3-legged cooking pot and stirring thin rice porridge for her 4 children. Her hands moved quickly, and her mind was busy with worries. Would they have enough cassava to sell this week? Could Chidi's torn school uniform last a little longer? Outside, the dry Harmattan wind blew dust everywhere. On their zinc roof, their cassava plants, even on the children's old school notebooks. Life was hard, but they managed. Her husband, Emeka, worked at the bottling factory in Aba Town and brought home just enough money to take care of them. It wasn't much, but it was their life. Until that morning, when 4 men came to their gate. No smiles, no greetings, only the kind of silence that tells you something terrible is about to happen. Chisholm was in the front yard, broom in hand, humming softly as she swept the packed dirt around their home. The familiar work gave her time to plan. Then she saw them coming, 3 village elders walking slowly toward her house, their faces serious and sad. Behind them was Pastor Uzoma from their community church, his Bible clutched tightly against his chest. Something in their walk, in their eyes, made Chisholm's heart stop before they even spoke a word. The broom slipped from her fingers and fell to the ground. Her throat went dry. Somehow, her body understood what was coming before the words were even spoken. "Our wife," the oldest elder said gently. His voice was heavy, like he was carrying a weight too difficult to bear. "We bring heavy news." Time seemed to slow down as they explained. The workers' bus from the bottling factory had crashed. The brakes failed on that steep hill just before the Imo River Bridge, a stretch of road everyone knew was dangerous, especially during Harmattan, when dust made everything slippery. The bus had plunged into the river below. 23 workers didn't make it out alive. Emeka was one of them. They told her the details in gentle voices, how they had identified him by the factory ID card still hanging around his neck, how the company had already promised to cover funeral expenses, how sorry everyone was for her loss. The strange thing was, Chisholm didn't fall apart right there. She didn't scream or faint or collapse. Instead, a strange calmness took over, like her mind needed to protect itself from the full impact of what was happening. She nodded, asked appropriate questions, thanked them for bringing the news. She even offered them water, as custom demanded for visitors. But inside, a storm was brewing. It was only after they all left, after she slowly walked into the bedroom she had shared with Emeka for 15 years, after she gently closed the door behind her, that the first tears came. Silent streams running down her face as she sat on the edge of their bed. She picked up his pillow, pressed it against her face, breathing in his scent that still lingered there. But even in this moment of unbearable pain, reality kept knocking. The sound of children playing down the road reminded her that soon her 4 children would come home from school, innocent, unaware that their world had just been shattered, that their father, who always brought little treats on payday, who helped with homework each night, who dreamed of sending them all to university someday, would never walk through their door again. How would she tell them? What words could possibly explain to a 14-year-old boy, 10-year-old twin girls, and a 6-year-old little boy that their father was gone forever? Chisholm wiped her tears with the edge of her wrapper. She couldn't afford the luxury of falling apart completely. Not with 4 children who would need her strength more than ever before. Not with school fees coming due next month. Not with an uncertain future suddenly stretching before her like a dark road with no lights to guide the way. The Harmattan winds continued to blow outside, dust settling on everything just like before. But for Chisholm Ease, nothing would ever be the same again. How do you tell your children that their father is never coming home again? This was the question crushing Chisholm's chest as she sat waiting for her children to return from school. Ikenna, her firstborn at 14, was the serious one. Tall for his age, just like Emeka, with the same thoughtful eyes that seemed to take in everything. He was smart too, always top of his class, making his father so proud. Emeka would often say, "That boy will be a doctor someday, mark my words." Then there were the twins, Ngozi and Neka, 10 years old and impossible to separate. Those two were always whispering secrets to each other, playing tricks on their brothers, giggling behind their hands, but Chisholm knew their mischief hid hearts as soft as fresh bread. When a neighbor's cat had kittens last year, the twins had cried for 3 days when they couldn't keep one. And little Chitty, just 6 years old, who looked so much like Amika, it sometimes took Chisholm's breath away. That gap between his front teeth when he smiled, the way he tilted his head to the side when something confused him. Pure Amika, through and through. Chitty still believed his father was some kind of superhero who could fix anything from broken toys to scraped knees. The neighbors had gathered at Chisholm's compound after hearing the news. Women from nearby homes brought small pots of soup and jars of palm oil, the traditional first response to tragedy in their community. They sat with her in silence, occasionally murmuring prayers, waiting with her for the children to return from school. When the children finally appeared on the dirt path leading to their home, they were doing what they always did. Ikenna walking slightly ahead, carrying not just his bag, but Chitty's as well. The twins skipping along side by side, and little Chitty trying to keep up, chattering about something that had happened in his classroom that day. But their normal after-school routine shattered the moment they entered the compound. Seeing their mother surrounded by somber neighbors, Ikenna knew instantly. The school bag slid from his shoulder and hit the ground with a thud. He stood frozen, his teenage face crumpling as he shook his head back and forth, rejecting the truth before it was even spoken. "No," he whispered, his voice breaking. "No, Mama, no." The twins stopped their skipping mid-step. They reached for each other's hands, gripping so tightly their knuckles turned white. Their usual endless chatter died in their throats. But it was little Chitty who truly broke Chisholm's heart. He looked around at all the sad faces, confusion spreading across his small features. Then, in his high, clear voice that seemed to echo in the sudden silence, he asked, "Where is Papa? Is he bringing sweets today?" "It's Friday. He always brings sweets on Friday." How do you answer that? How do you destroy a child's world with words? Somehow, Chisholm found the strength to gather her children close, to tell them what had happened. Ikenna turned and punched the wall of their house, then crumpled to his knees, sobbing. The twins wailed loudly, clinging to each other like they were drowning. And Chitty, poor Chitty, kept asking when Papa was coming back, unable to understand why everyone was crying. The days that followed passed in a blur of grief and tradition. Their community had specific rituals for mourning, relatives coming from nearby villages to stay with them, neighbors bringing food and firewood, church members taking turns to pray with the family. Women sat with Chisholm through long nights when sleep refused to come, listening as she worried aloud about how she would feed her children now that Emeka's income was gone. The factory sent a representative who handed over Emeka's final wages and a small death benefit, a sum that seemed substantial at first, but that Chisholm knew wouldn't stretch beyond a few months. The man also brought a letter expressing the company's condolences, a form letter with Emeka's name filled in, not even signed by hand. When the day of the funeral arrived, the entire village gathered. Everyone respected Emeka. He wasn't like some factory workers who drank away their paychecks at the palm wine bars on the way home. Instead, he taught Sunday school at church, saved diligently for his children's education, and dreamed aloud about seeing all four through university one day. As they lowered Emeka's simple wooden coffin into the red earth of the cemetery, Chisholm felt as if part of herself was being buried too. Her legs nearly gave way beneath her, and if not for Ikenna suddenly standing tall beside her, his arms strong around her shoulders despite his tears, she might have collapsed. "God knows best," the mourners told her as they filed past. "Take heart. Be strong for the children." Empty phrases that people say when they don't know what else to offer. Words that did nothing to fill the massive void Emeka had left in their lives. Words that couldn't pay school fees, or put food on the table, or mend the hole in their family. That night, after returning from the cemetery, all four children refused to sleep in their usual spots. Instead, they dragged their sleeping mat into the main room and huddled together. Ikenna, with one arm protectively around Chitty, the twins curled against each other like they had been in the womb. None of them wanted to be alone with their grief. After they finally fell asleep, exhausted from days of crying, Chisholm sat alone in the darkness of their small compound. The moon cast long shadows as she faced the brutal truth of her situation. She was now the sole provider for four children, with minimal education, few marketable skills, and rapidly dwindling resources. The weight of Emeka's absence pressed down on her chest like a stone. It wasn't just the loss of her husband and the father of her children, it was the loss of security, of stability, of knowing that no matter how difficult things got, they faced it together. Now she was alone, and the path ahead looked impossible to navigate. As Chisholm sat alone in the darkness, the full weight of her situation crashed down on her. What skills did she have to support her family? She had only finished primary school before her father arranged her marriage to Emeka when she was just 16. For 15 years, she had been a wife and mother, cooking, cleaning, raising children, tending their small cassava farm. None of these were skills that could earn enough money to feed 4 growing children and keep them in school. The small patch of cassava they grew barely supplemented their meals. Sometimes there was a little extra to trade with neighbors, cassava for salt, cassava for palm oil, but never enough to sell for actual cash in the market. And now, Emeka's steady paycheck from the factory was gone forever. Chisholm's mind raced through their financial situation like a woman drowning. Their rent would be due to the landlord in just 2 months. Right after that, school fees for the new term would need to be paid. Food prices at the market seemed to jump higher every week. A cup of rice that cost 50 naira last month now cost 65. Every time she went shopping, she came home with less but spent more. In all these years of marriage, she had never felt so alone with such enormous problems. Emeka had always been the one to figure things out when money was tight. They were a team. Now, the other half of that team was gone. For the first time since those men had appeared at her compound with the terrible news, Chisholm allowed herself to truly break down. She covered her mouth with her wrapper cloth to muffle the sounds, not wanting to wake the children who had finally cried themselves to sleep. Her body shook with sobs as the tears came. Not the silent, controlled tears from before, but gut-wrenching cries that made her gasp for breath. "God, why have you forsaken me?" she whispered into the darkness. "What did I do to deserve this? How am I supposed to do this alone?" The answer to her desperate prayer came the following week, though not in any form she would have chosen. A shiny car, the kind rarely seen on the dusty roads of their village, pulled up outside her compound. Village children appeared from nowhere, gathering to stare at the vehicle with wide eyes and pointing fingers. Out stepped Uzoma, Emeka's older brother from Port Harcourt. He wore a bright purple agbada with gold embroidery, multiple gold rings, and sunglasses that he did not remove even as he entered the shade of Chisholm's compound. The smell of expensive cologne announced his presence before he even spoke. Uzoma was everything Emeka was not. Loud where Emeka had been thoughtful, flashy where Emeka had been modest, boastful where Emeka had been humble. He was always talking about his latest business deals in Port Harcourt, though nobody seemed to understand exactly what business he was in. While Emeka had faithfully sent money home to their aging parents every month, Uzoma visited perhaps once a year, bringing flashy gifts, but little actual support. Word spread quickly, and soon the village elders gathered to welcome Uzoma properly. He accepted their greetings with exaggerated importance, distributing small amounts of cash to each elder. A show of generosity that Chisholm knew was more about impressing others than actual kindness. "My brother's widow cannot suffer," Uzoma announced grandly, his voice carrying so everyone in the compound could hear. "I will take care of everything. This is what family does." The elders nodded approvingly, murmuring among themselves about what a good brother Uzoma was. But Chisholm had known Uzoma for 15 years. He noticed how his generosity always came with strings attached. Later, when the elders had left and the children were playing outside, Uzoma finally revealed his true intentions. He helped himself to the small bottle of schnapps he had brought, not bothering to offer any to Chisholm before pouring himself a generous amount. "The tradition is simple," he stated, swirling the liquid in his glass. "You will become my wife. The bride price has already been paid to your family years ago. I will take you and the children to Port Harcourt. The boys can go to better schools there. The girls too, if you insist." Chisholm stared at him in shock, unable to speak for several seconds. The practice of wife inheritance, where a widow was married to her husband's brother, was an old tradition that was dying out in most communities. Even in the more traditional villages, it was becoming a choice rather than an obligation. Besides, The mere thought of being married to Uzoma made her stomach turn. She had never liked him, with his roving eyes that undressed every woman he met, the smell of expensive cologne that couldn't quite mask the odor of dishonesty that seemed to follow him everywhere. "I cannot marry you, Uzoma," she finally said, her voice quiet but firm. Emeka would not want this. The change in Uzoma's expression was instant. The friendly facade crumbled, revealing the anger and entitlement beneath. His smile disappeared, replaced by a sneer that distorted his features. "Then you are on your own," he snapped, slamming his glass down so hard that schnapps splashed onto the table. "Don't expect any help from the family. The house, the land, everything belonged to my brother, which means it returns to our family now." "This house is rented," Chisholm replied, maintaining her composure despite her heart pounding in her chest. "And the small farm was given to us by my father when we married." Uzoma stood up, towering over her in an attempt to intimidate. "We'll see what the elders say about that," he threatened, his voice low and dangerous before he stormed out, leaving the door open behind him. Chisholm watched through the window as he stalked toward his shiny car, already pulling out his phone to call someone. She knew this wasn't over. Uzoma wasn't a man who accepted rejection easily, especially from a woman he saw as beneath him. One possible solution to her desperate situation had just walked out the door. But even facing poverty and uncertainty, Chisholm knew in her heart that marrying Uzoma would be jumping from the frying pan into the fire. There had to be another way forward, even if she couldn't see it yet. Uzoma was not a man who gave up easily. Just as Chisholm expected, the very next day he called a meeting with the village elders. He arrived wearing an even more expensive outfit than before, his car freshly washed and gleaming in the morning sun. The meeting took place under the big mango tree in the center of the village, where important matters were always discussed. Uzoma sat with his legs spread wide, taking up more space than necessary, speaking loudly so everyone could hear. "Our traditions are clear," he told the 7 old men who sat in a half-circle facing him. "When a man dies, his possessions go back to his family. Emeka's land should return to the AK family. Since his widow refuses to follow tradition and marry me, she has no right to anything." Chisholm sat quietly on a low stool at the edge of the circle, as was expected of women during such meetings. Inside, her heart was racing, but her face remained calm. She noticed how Uzoma kept saying Emeka's land when the small farm plot had actually come from her own father as a wedding gift. Most of the elders shifted uncomfortably as Uzoma spoke. They knew his demands were too harsh, but tradition was strong in their community, and Uzoma had not come empty-handed. Before the meeting, he had given each elder a brown envelope containing cash, and to the head elder, he had presented an expensive bottle of foreign whiskey. Chisholm watched their faces, trying to guess which way they would decide. If they sided with Uzoma, she would lose the farm that provided cassava and vegetables for her children. Without it, her situation would be even more desperate. The elders talked among themselves in low voices. 2 seemed firmly on Uzoma's side, nodding at everything he said. 3 others looked troubled, glancing occasionally at Chisholm with sympathy in their eyes. The remaining 2 kept their opinions hidden behind blank expressions. Then, when it seemed Uzoma might win through his gifts and loud arguments, Chief Nwosu spoke up. Chief Nwosu was the oldest man in the village, nearly 90 years old, with a face so lined it resembled the bark of an ancient tree. He rarely attended these meetings anymore due to his age, but something had brought him here today. "I have listened enough," Chief Nwosu said, his voice thin but clear. The other elders fell silent immediately, showing their respect for his age and wisdom. He turned to Uzoma, his cloudy eyes somehow still sharp. "That land belongs to Chisholm's father, who allowed his daughter and son-in-law to farm it when they married. I remember, because I was there when the agreement was made. It was never Emeka's alone to give or take, so it is not yours to claim." Uzoma tried to interrupt, but Chief Nwosu raised his hand, silencing him. "As for this talk of widow inheritance," the old man continued, "that practice has brought more tears than joy to our community. Many widows forced to marry brothers-in-law have suffered greatly. The woman has said no." He pointed a gnarled finger at Chisholm. "That is her right." The chief's words settled over the gathering like a heavy blanket. Even Uzoma seemed momentarily lost for words, his usual confidence shaken by the direct challenge from someone he couldn't easily intimidate or buy off. The other elders, perhaps relieved to have the decision taken from their hands, quickly agreed with Chief Nwosu. The land would remain with Chisholm and her children, and no one would force her to marry Uzoma or anyone else against her will. Uzoma's face darkened with anger, but he knew better than to argue further. Challenging the oldest chief would only make him lose face in front of the whole village. He left the meeting without the usual parting ceremonies, his back stiff with wounded pride. The next morning, as Chisholm was washing clothes outside her house, Uzoma stopped by on his way out of the village. His shiny car was packed with his belongings, ready for the return journey to Port Harcourt. "You think you've won," he said to her, his voice low and threatening. "But your victory will be short. You'll come begging to me soon enough, when your children are hungry and you have nowhere else to turn." Without waiting for her response, he climbed into his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. Chisholm watched the car disappear down the dirt road with mixed feelings. Relief that he was gone, but also worry about the future. She had won this battle, but the war to survive was just beginning. With Uzoma gone, Chisholm had to face her next big challenge: how to feed her children and keep them in school without Emeka's income. The small farm would provide some food, but they needed money for everything else: rent, school fees, medicine, clothes. She started by selling things from their small home that they could live without. First went Emeka's radio that he used to listen to football matches on weekends. Then the wedding china plates that had been a gift from her aunt and were only used for special occasions. Finally, she sold Emeka's wristwatch, the one he had saved for months to buy and wore with such pride. Each sale felt like selling a piece of their life together, but her children's needs came first. When these small funds began to run out, Chisholm knew she needed a more reliable source of income. She started waking up at 4 a.m. every morning to make akara and muamua to sell to travelers at the motor park where buses stopped on their way to the bigger towns. Her days became an endless cycle of work. Up before dawn to prepare her food for selling. A quick trip to the motor park to set up her small stall. Back home to get the children ready for school. Then off to work as a day laborer on other people's farms, planting, weeding, or harvesting for just enough money to buy ingredients for the next day's food sales. By the time she returned home in the evenings, her hands were cracked and bleeding. Her back ached from bending in the fields all day, and her feet were swollen from standing. But still, she managed to cook dinner for her children, check their homework, and mend their clothes before falling into an exhausted sleep, only to wake a few hours later and begin again. It was back-breaking work that earned barely enough to keep them fed. But Chisholm held on to her dignity. She would show Uzoma and everyone else that she could stand on her own feet, even if those feet were tired and sore. She would not beg. Not yet. Not ever. If she could help it. Weeks passed, then months. Chisholm worked harder than she ever had in her life, but it still wasn't enough. The small money she made from selling akara and working in other people's farms barely covered their daily needs. School fees were coming due soon, and she had no idea how she would pay them. Ikenna, her firstborn son, watched his mother with growing concern. At 14, he was old enough to understand exactly what was happening. He saw how she limped in the evenings from standing all day. He noticed how she gave the children larger portions and took less food for herself. He heard her coughing at night, a deep, wet cough that seemed to get worse each week. One evening, after the younger children had gone to bed, Ikenna sat down across from his mother at their small table. "Mama, I've been thinking," he said in a serious voice that made him sound much older than his years. "I should stop school and find work. Maybe at the bottling factory where Papa worked. They might hire me because of Papa." Chisholm's head snapped up, her tired eyes suddenly fierce. "No," she said firmly, reaching across the table to hold her son's face between her rough, calloused hands. "Your father believed education was the only true inheritance he could give you. I will not take that away. Not while I have strength left in my body." "But Mama, you are killing yourself," Ikenna argued, tears forming in his eyes. "I see how hard you work, how tired you are. Let me help." "You help by studying hard and taking care of your brothers and sisters when I'm not here," Chisholm told him. "That is enough for now." But even as she said these words, Chisholm knew her body was failing her. Years of having babies, carrying heavy loads, and working from dawn to dusk had already worn her down. Now, the relentless pace of her days was destroying what strength she had left. She ignored the signs as long as she could. The constant headaches, the pain in her chest when she breathed deeply, the fever that came and went. She couldn't afford to be sick. Her children couldn't afford for her to be sick. Then, 6 months after Emeka's death, on a rainy morning at the motor park, it happened. Chisholm was setting up her usual spot, arranging freshly fried akara on her tray, when the world suddenly tilted sideways. She heard people shouting as if from far away. Then everything went black as she collapsed to the ground, her tray of akara scattering in the muddy dust. When she opened her eyes again, she was lying on a narrow bed in the small community health center. The first thing she saw was Ikenna sitting on a wooden chair beside her, still wearing his school uniform, now wrinkled and rumpled. His young face was drawn with worry, dark circles under his eyes showing he hadn't slept. "The doctor says you need rest, Mama," he said, when he saw she was awake, his voice cracking with emotion that he tried to hide. "You have pneumonia from working in the rain. Your body is very weak from not eating enough and working too hard." Panic shot through Chisholm, and she tried to sit up despite the stabbing pain in her chest. "The twins! And Chidi!" "Mrs. Obi from next door is watching them," Ikenna quickly assured her, gently pushing her back onto the pillow. "Everyone in the neighborhood is helping. The twins are helping her cook, and Chidi is playing with her grandson. They are okay for now." Chisholm relaxed slightly, but her mind was already racing ahead to all the problems this illness would cause. "My stall at the motor park—" "Mama," Ikenna interrupted, his young face suddenly stern in a way that reminded her painfully of Emeka. "You cannot continue like this. The doctor says you could have died if people hadn't brought you here quickly." "But what choice do I have?" Chisholm whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Who will feed you all if I don't work?" The doctor kept Chisholm at the health center for 3 days, giving her medicines for the pneumonia and insisting she needed complete rest. Ikenna came every day after school, bringing the twins and Chidi with him so they could see their mother was getting better. When she was finally released, Chisholm was shocked to learn that the hospital bill had used up almost all of their remaining savings. The money she'd been setting aside bit by bit for school fees was now gone, and she was still too weak to return to her full work schedule, though she tried her best to make small batches of akara for Ikenna to sell before school. Then, just when she thought things couldn't get worse, she found a letter waiting when she returned home. The landlord was increasing their rent by 50%, starting next month. The new amount was far beyond what she could possibly pay, even if she was healthy and working at full strength. That night, after all 4 children had fallen asleep, crowded together on their sleeping mats, seeking comfort in each other's presence, Chisholm sat alone in the dark kitchen and wept silently. Not the noisy, gasping sobs of fresh grief, but the quiet, defeated tears of someone who sees no way forward. For the first time, Uzoma's offer began to seem less repulsive when weighed against her children's hungry faces and the very real threat of homelessness. The rainy season would start soon. Where would they go if they couldn't pay the rent? How would the children stay in school if they had no fixed home? Perhaps, for their sake, she should swallow her pride and accept his proposal. Maybe becoming Uzoma's wife, despite how much the thought disgusted her, was the sacrifice she needed to make for her children's future. As this thought formed in her mind, Chisholm felt a deep shame wash over her. What kind of life would that be? Living with a man she didn't respect, let alone love? What example would that set for her daughters? For her sons? But as the wind rattled the loose tin sheets of their roof and her chest ached with each breath, Chisholm faced the cruel truth. She was out of options, out of money, out of strength, out of time. After many sleepless nights filled with worry, Chisholm finally admitted to herself that she had run out of options. Her illness had used up their savings. The rent increase was impossible to pay. Her body was still weak from pneumonia. The truth hit her like a brick wall. She couldn't keep her family together anymore. Her sister in a village about 20 miles away had offered to take the twins. The sister had 3 children of her own already, but somehow she would manage with 2 more mouths to feed. At least there, Ngozi and Nneka could continue their education in the village school. Emeka's brother, Inoweri, not Uzoma, but his younger brother Uche, had reluctantly agreed to take Ikenna. Uche wasn't a wealthy man, just a school teacher with a small apartment. But he had promised to make sure Ikenna could continue his studies. That was the most important thing to Chisom, that her firstborn son's education wouldn't be interrupted. As for little Chidi, he would stay with Chisom. She planned to take him to Aba, the nearest city, where she hoped to find work as a house help or maybe in one of the markets. 6-year-olds were too young for boarding school, and besides, she couldn't bear the thought of having none of her children with her. At least with Chidi by her side, she would still feel like a mother. When Chisom told the children about her decision, their reactions broke her heart all over again. "No, Mama, please! We want to stay together!" the twins cried, holding each other tighter than ever. Ikenna didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the floor, his jaw tight, trying to be the man of the house even though he was only 14. Little Chidi looked confused. "But when will we all be together again?" he kept asking. "Soon," Chisom promised, though she had no idea if that was true. "As soon as I find good work in Aba, I will send for each of you. This is just for a short time." That night, she heard Ikenna crying quietly outside the house. He thought no one could hear him as he sat with his back against the mud wall, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Chisom wanted to go to him, to hold him, but something told her to give him this private moment. He was trying so hard to be strong in front of his siblings. The next morning, without telling his mother, Ikenna made a decision. He picked up his father's toolbox, the one thing of value they still owned. Emeka had been skilled with his hands and had collected these tools over many years. He had taught Ikenna how to use each one, showed him how to fix things around their small house. The toolbox was like having a piece of his father still with them, but sentimentality wouldn't pay the rent or buy food. Ikenna decided to walk to the market town 10 kilometers away, where he might get a better price for the tools than in their small village. "I'm going to visit my friend," he told his mother that morning. "I'll be back before dark." Chisom was busy packing their few belongings into bundles and didn't question him too closely. The walk to the market town was long under the hot sun. Ikenna's stomach growled with hunger. They had all been eating less to make their food stretch further. The toolbox grew heavy in his hands, but he kept going. If he could get enough money for these tools, maybe they could stay together for just one more month. Maybe in that time, his mother could find work. When he finally reached the busy market, he looked around for someone who might want to buy tools. He spotted a small stall where a man was fixing radios and other electronics. Perfect. Someone like that would understand the value of good tools. As Chisom's world crumbles, her son is making a silent decision. Will Ikenna's desperate sacrifice be enough to keep them together? Or will it tear them even further apart? And the man at that stall, is he just another stranger? Or could he be the turning point no one saw coming? Find out in part 2 of Tears of the Harmattan. The link is in the description below. What would you do if you were in Chisom's shoes? Choose dignity or survival? Type "Chisom must rise" in the comments if you believe she'll make it. And share your thoughts. I read every one. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more soul-stirring African stories. Your support helps these stories reach more hearts around the world.